So you're looking to play some Ranger, but the choices are driving you a little crazy. You could play the old standby Soulbeast because you've heard it's the way to go for open world. Or you could try and play some Untamed, but you've heard it sucks and no one plays it. But the real question is, why not? Why not indeed? It's Soulbeast, it's Untamed, it's a double digest, but cheap. What's good, everyone? You got Mind Circus here with you, and welcome to Ranger, Untamed and Soulbeast, but cheap. Hey, before we get started, if you are new to Guild Wars 2, new to the channel, just haven't done so yet, I am currently farming likes and subscribes in an effort to build the channel, and if you want to hook me up with one of those just below the video, that would be outstanding. So with that out of the way, let's take a couple of seconds and talk about the video before we get into it. We're going to be looking at two different specs here with the same gear setup. I was doing a little testing as I was working on an Untamed build for this series and realized that the same damage engine that was powering it was largely applicable to Soulbeast as well. It's not any kind of thing where we're going to be reinventing the wheel, so to speak, but we will be running this in some pretty cheap gear. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at our shopping list. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using the same gear on both specs. We're going to start with a complete set of Errol's gear. E-R-R-O-L-S or apostrophe S. That means Errol's mask, coat, boots, gloves, leggings, and pauldrons. This is what's known as dire gear. Now, dire gear is going to give us condition damage, plus some toughness and vitality. It's a really solid set for open world. I wouldn't recommend this for things like instance content, but again, this is your open world build right here. We're going to be using 6 superior runes of the afflicted. We will grab 2 fangs of Tequatl, 2 traveler's rings, a traveler's amulet, 6 chrysocolla orbs. We're going to be using a dire ceremonial shortbow of rage, a dire pearl brazier. We are going to be using faithful, which is an exotic quality axe that will get off the TP with everything else. We will grab a rare rabbit spine guard and 2 superior sigils of agony. This puts our total price all in off the trading post at 9 gold, 95 silver, and 84 copper. So let's take a look at the way I put this all together here. As you will note, I put the chrysocolla orbs into all the trinkets here. This is a quick, cheap, easy pickup on condi damage and vitality. Gives us a little power, which is not bad. And in the, obviously, armor, I am running the afflicted runes. I have left the superior sigil of fire inside the axe, and I have left the superior sigil of rage inside the shortbow. Additionally, I have placed the superior sigils of agony inside the other weapons. Now, as for how this all comes together and how I would run this in terms of gear progression, the first thing I'd start looking at is things like bursting sigils. I would run this in either complete Viper's gear or I would run this in Trailblazer's gear. Now, Trailblazers is going to give us the damage and survivability, and the Viper's gear is going to be a straight up damage increase. So again, Viper's gear, you're going to want to go with crate runes on this. You're going to want to put in a bursting sigil at the very least, and you'll probably want to get rid of the agony sigils because I believe the crate runes will overcap our bleeding duration at that point in either Viper's or in Trailblazer's armor. So you'll want to make your own choice at that point. There's a ton of different options. Things like a Sigil of Doom is probably a really good idea as well. So with all that said, hey, let's start looking at the builds. So let's go ahead and start with the fact that on both of these builds, we will be using Wilderness Survival and Skirmishing and the same trait setup. The only thing that's going to change between the builds here is the Elite spec. So let's start with Wilderness Survival. We will be running Taste for Danger, gain increased vitality. You and your pet gain expertise based on vitality. This is one of the places that the Dire gear is going to start showing us some value, and the reason that I ran the Chrysocolla Orb orbs. This is obviously going to give us expertise, which is Condi duration, directly translating into a fair bit of damage. We're going to be running ambidexterity, gain condition damage, gain additional condition damage while wielding a torch. This again gets to the fact that our offhand weapon on both specs will be torch. Alright, and the condition damage bump of 120 is nothing to shake a stick at. We'll be using Poison Master. Upon using a beast ability, your pet's next attack will inflict poison. Your poison damage is likewise increased. We're going to be using Sharpened Edges. You and your pet have a chance to cause bleeding on critical hits. This again, a DPS increase. We'll be using Hidden Barbs. Bleeding you inflict is more dangerous. There is a little bit of a choice on this one. Let's go over it really quickly. In group scenarios, Spotter is going to provide us a fair bit of value in terms of people running power builds around us, so we may want to keep that in mind if the people around us are not capped on critical. But otherwise, Hidden Barbs is going to be the one that you use, particularly when you are solo. This is a 30% increase on bleeding damage, which we will be doing a fair amount of. Finally, we will be using Light on your feet. Damage and condition duration are increased after dodging or using Quick Shot. Quick Shot is a shortbow skill, a shortbow 3, the one that kind of pushes you backwards. We'll go over this in the gameplay section, but obviously working a dodge or running Quick Shot into your damage rotation is going to be a really big win for you in terms of the overall damage dealt with. Let's now go into Untamed. Now, in Untamed, we will be using Debilitating Blows. Disabling a foe applies conditions to that foe based on your current state. There's going to be some changes here in the tray. Again, we're going to be using Exploding Spores, which will give a knockdown effect. We're also going to be using Spike Trap here on Untamed. These are where we're going to start to get value off this right here. And we're going to start the value by getting 5 stacks of vulnerability for 7.5 seconds. This is a really big damage increase. We're going to be using Enhancing Impact. Disabling a foe grants you boons based on your current state. When we are in the Unleashed Ranger, we will be getting Quickness off this. Quickness is a really big win. If we are having the pet unleashed, we will go ahead and we will be getting Stability at that point. And finally, Ferocious Symbiosis. You and your pet grant each other increased damage and movement speed while striking enemies. Let's go over the bar here really quickly. If you've watched any of my Ranger videos, you know that generally I am going to go with We Heal as One. What We Heal as One does is it will copy boons between you and your pet back and forth. When it comes to Untamed on this is a very valuable skill, and I would absolutely run this over the Untamed heal. We're going to be running Exploding Spores, as I mentioned before, and we're going to be running Spike Trap. These two I'm considering non-negotiable for a few different reasons. I really like these two powers and the way that they come together with Untamed specifically. We'll take a look at the Soulbeast setup in a few minutes, but these I would run above any other choices. Now, when it comes again to your stun break, I am going to be running Quickening Zephyr. I like the stability in the super speed. I think this is a really big win in terms of stun breaks. That said, you also have the option here of running Sharpening Stone when you are not in scenarios where a stun break is needed. Sharpening Stones is a really powerful skill. I might even take this over the Spike Trap depending on what I was fighting, but again, this is kind of one of those situations where you've got a few different options. Also, you have Lightning Reflexes in terms of a stun break. This is not as good as Quickening Zephyr in PvE. In PvP, though, I find that, or in World versus World, I may not play a whole lot of PvP, that Lightning Reflexes is a little bit bigger value, so you may want to keep that in mind. Obviously, there are other options here in terms of stun breaks. Signet of Renewal, obviously, is one where we will get some health back. We don't get a ton in the gear that we're on. I've never really really seen huge value on this, but again, as a stun break, it is as good as any other stun break. Finally, on Untamed here, we are going to be using Forest's Fortification. We will go over this in the gameplay section, but I am a really big fan of this power. This, however, is more of a defensive option. If you need an offensive option, I'm going to go with Entangle on this one, particularly in scenarios where we're dealing with trash mobs. You also wouldn't be wrong for running Strength of the Pack. Strength of the Pack is a bit of a fury increase, but also offers 10 stacks of stability for 8 seconds. It's pretty strong, so you may want to keep that in mind as well. But for damage, I'm going with Entangle. Otherwise, I'm going with Forest's Fortification. I am a really, really big fan of this power. We, again, will go over this in the gameplay section. So let's get into the differences here. As I mentioned before, if you want to go back, if you are skipping back and forth, you will miss my descriptions on Wilderness Survival and Skirmishing. That said, let's look at Soulbeast at this point. You've got two options. If you're the kind of player that likes to boon up before you go into Beast mode, then you will want to take Fresh Reinforcement, which will go ahead and copy boons back and forth. Otherwise, you're going to use Live Fast on this, which is a quickness and a fury bump. We're going to be running Predator's Cunning. Predator's Cunning is where we are going to get the majority of our passive sustain on this one. This one turns poison damage into health. It's a pretty big win. I would highly recommend running it. And finally, we'll be running Oppressive Superiority. On this build, there is no better trait to take. This is non-negotiable. Take Oppressive Superiority, which is deal increased strike damage to foes at a lower health percentage than you. Conditions you apply to foes at a lower health percentage than you last longer. This is a 10% damage bump and really part of the reason we would take Soulbeast in the first place. Let's look down at our bar here in a few moments. We have We Heal as 1 here. There are, of course, other options. As I have mentioned before, if you are in conditions or in situations where you are seeing some Condi damage, then taking Bear Stance is a really big win here. There are, of course, other options, but again, I'm going to go default back to We Heal as 1, where I am going to, do a little boom play with it. If I'm not worried about the boom play, I'll probably take a different option. I am going to be running Quickening Zephyr. Quickening Zephyr, as I mentioned in the Untamed section, a really nice stun break and quickness generator. I'm going to be running Sharpening Stone. Now, Sharpening Stone is a bleeding generator and obviously is just a really nice big damage increase. And finally, I'm going to be running Viper's Nest. Viper's Nest is going to come into play with Predator's Cunning and some of the other options that we have. So again, with this build, we're going to be healing off our poison damage. We will get some poison damage off Poison Master. We will get some poison damage here off Viper's Nest. And I believe we get some poison damage right here off Shortbow 2, which is a really, really nice skill. Other options are going to include some of the other traps. I do like Flame Trap on this build a fair bit, and I do like the damage that comes off Spike Trap as well. Another damage option we're going to be taking here is Entangle. You also have the option of One Wolf Pack on this. This is really nice as well. I do, however, really like the consistent damage that comes off Entangle. Sometimes I find One Wolf Pack a little bit finicky to use in some situations, so it's kind of the choice of yours at that point. Again, if you're getting to situations where stability is an issue, you're probably going to want to take Strength of the Pack. That said, this is not a really this is on a pretty long cooldown compared to some of the other options that we have here. So keep that in mind. I really do like Entangle overall for the bleeding damage and the immob. And that, my friends, is the Soulbeast setup. One thing I will touch on at this point is Ranger Pets. I am running the same Ranger Pets on both setups, so let's take a look at this. I am running the Eagle, the Juvenile Eagle, and I am running the Juvenile Lynx, which is easily found in World vs. World and a few other places. Both of these pets are really specializing in bleeding damage. The pet poison damage traits or poison damage skills may not be the kind of thing that you can rely on as well as other options, but they are there. I am really just going to default to these two pets, though. Particularly, I really don't feel that the Lynx has a better option. Let's go over gameplay. We'll start with the Soulbeast on this one, and really this is just a matter of doing a whole lot of damage. We'll take a look at where our CC is here as well, but again, this is a really high damage kind of spec, so we're going to get a lot of our mitigation when it comes to the traits that we put in before, and we'll take a look at this really quickly. We're talking specifically about healing off poison damage, so that is going to give us a lot of our survivability, unlike Untamed, which is a much beefier kind of higher sustain kind of spec. So when playing Soulbeast, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to make sure that we are proccing our quickness as often as possible without blowing our quickening Zephyr as a stun break. We are going to make sure that we are either dodging or using quick shot as often as possible, because you saw in our build we are getting a fair bit of damage off that. So one of the things that we might do is we might go quickening Zephyr, we heal as one, then go ahead here into beast mode. We'll get a fair bit more value off the quickness on that, and then we're just going to start doing our damage. Primal Cry, also a really nice damage option, as you see. And that really is kind of the down and dirty of it. We'll use Sharpening Stone just to up our DPS on a regular basis as well. Hitting Sharpening Stone before we hit the fan of Poison Volley is obviously a really big win. And then we've got the Poison Trap and the Entangle, and really we're just going to be looking at dealing a buttload of damage and kind of, you know, making sure that we're keeping our feet in the right place, dodging red circles. We can't obviously stand in too many red circles on this build. That said, it's pretty beefy. We do have a lot of vitality. We do have a lot of toughness. We are getting a fair bit of passive values on the sustain out of Predator's Cunning. So it's not obviously the worst choice under those scenarios. When we flip over our weapons, it's important to note here that we're getting Might constantly off Ricochet. So hitting this is going to be bigger value when we are in situations where this can bounce, okay? So when it's bouncing, when there are multiple enemies around, we will get more hits and therefore more might, so we'll keep that in mind. Split Blade is also just some bleeding damage right there, very much like the short bow too. And then on Winter's Bite, we're going to get some chill in addition to everything else, so we'll take a look at that over in the CC section. Throw Torch obviously is going to give us some burning damage, and then we'll get more big burning damage in an AoE here off Bonfire, which is the Torch 5. It's pretty simple to play. We'll get into the CC now at this point. Now with the CC, we get a lot of value off Entangle. Okay, we're getting a bit of value off Winter's Bite. We also get a fair bit of value here with Concussion Shot. If we take a look at the CC that puts down, that is not an insignificant amount of CC. So there we have it. It is a pretty simple spec to play. Untamed, a little more involved, and we'll take a look at that now. So Untamed, as I mentioned, a little bit more involved to play. The reasons being are that the disabled comes into a bigger play. So we're really looking at doing a lot more CC in order to give ourselves value. So in terms of the CC, we'll go over this first. When it comes to the damage is no different functionally speaking, other than a few of the pet abilities, which I will leave you to go ahead and kind of explore. Keeping in mind, obviously, we also have the Unleash Pet and Unleash Ranger ability as well, and we will talk about that in a second. So let's go over the CC really quickly here in terms of the weapons. Make sure you go ahead and watch the Soulbeast portion of the video. When it comes to CC, obviously we still have our Concussion Shot, all right, and we still have our Winter's Bite here. Okay, we also have Exploding Spores. Now, Exploding Spores is really kind of valuable, particularly when it comes to any kind of situation where we're dealing with a lot of ads, but also keeping in mind that the enemies that are hit by all the spores are knocked down, so we do want to keep that in mind as well. Spike Trap doing very much the same thing, just bringing us a ton of CC. Let's talk about forests fortification here for a moment. Now, forest fortification is stability, forests fortification is resistance, and it is also resolution, but more importantly, depending on what of the unleashed states you are in, is going to give us a different effect. If we are Ranger unleashed, then what we get is the super speed, and if we have our pet unleashed, we are going to get vigor on that. What is also important about Forest's fortification is we have the ability to bring down the cooldown on this one really quickly. So a good example here is we will go into shortbow for a moment. We will fire off Forest's fortification. As soon as we do fire that off, you'll see that the cooldown actually decreases with the amount of hits that we do on it. So let's go ahead and we will hit Forest's fortification. We will get the buff from that. We will start doing some attacks, and as you see, those are going to be actually bringing down that cooldown really quickly. That is a really important thing, and what makes this skill so important and fun. It really does have a little bit of depth to it that a lot of other skills in the game don't have. So if we are using this judiciously in areas that we know we're going to be doing a lot of really quick hits, we can bring back the benefit of fortification really darn fast. So keep that in mind. Now, forest fortification, as I mentioned, largely a defensive skill, but it is one of the more powerful defensive skills. Let's take a few minutes and talk about the Unleashed mode. Now, the Unleashed mode has two different kind of variants to it. You have Unleashed Pet and Unleashed Ranger, and really what this means is who is doing the damage and who is getting the defensive buff. Really, I'm going to camp Unleashed Ranger most of the time. It is a significant damage increase. I highly recommend you kind of camp Unleashed Ranger, and then go into Unleashed Pet when you are needing that oh shit button. That oh shit button is actually more powerful than you might think. And really that is what sets this kind of mechanic, as well as the CC abilities and getting the buffs off CC, is really what separates Untamed from Soulbeast. In terms of the difference between them and the overall and my recommendations, we'll get into that as soon as I'm done. So what I'm actually going to be doing here with Untamed is I'm going to be doing as much CC as possible. Then I am going to proc the Forest Fortification and then Quickness, because that'll give me the ability to do a lot more hits in a very short amount of time, which will of course decrease the cooldown again on Forest's Fortification. This is a much tougher spec. Now, this is not to say that its damage sucks. It absolutely does not suck. It's in a good place. And I know I'm going to take some dislikes for that, but I quite enjoy this spec. And I am going to point out another content creator who really understands the Untamed well. I've noted him in the past, but a shout out here to Paper Roll. You'll find a link in the description down below to Paper Roll's channel, who really understands Ranger about as well as any content creator out there. And I will kind of suggest that if you are struggling with it, if you don't know what to do with it, I have the Untamed, the Power Untamed version, or is more geared towards Power on the channel. That'll be linked in the description down below. Take a look at Paper Roll stuff. I know a lot of people out there are kind of iffy on Untamed. I'm a really big fan. I think it is a lot of fun, so I'm going to recommend it. But if you're one of those people who, you know, may not be enjoying it very much, keep in mind the description here of the Unleash mechanic. Keep in mind that a lot of what you are doing depends on disabling your foes, and if you're still struggling after that, there will be the links in the description. And that, folks, is Ranger, both Untamed and Soulbeast. Soulbeast on the cheap. It's really important to realize that you can change your build outside of combat whenever you want in Guild Wars 2. And if you want to go ahead and kind of experiment with both these builds, I think that this is a really good, cheap way to do it. In terms of what I prefer more, I am more into the more engaged play of Untamed than I enjoy the Soulbeast style. Soulbeast is absolutely more damage in terms of the way this build is set up. We're talking about 15 to 20% more damage. It's not an insignificant amount of damage, but that's not to say that we're not getting a decent livable amount of damage out of Untamed, as well as some defensive options that a lot of classes and specs just can't come close to touching. So with all that said, my friends, I'm going to thank you all very much for watching. I'm going to remind you to have fun in-game and min-max your real life, and I am most glad we took this moment. We will see you next time.